That's the reason they do it. We're joined now by the Select Committee member who played the lead role in today's hearing, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us. So your panel laid out some pretty stunning evidence today from stalwart conservative Republicans, in addition to the election workers. In your view, how much, if any, of what we heard today reaches a threshold of actual criminality?
Well, again, look, I've said for some time that I agreed with David Carter, the federal judge in California, that this plot to overturn the election likely violated multiple federal laws. Now, it's one thing to say there's enough evidence to begin an investigation. It's another thing to say, is there proof beyond a reasonable doubt? And that latter judgment is going to be one for the Department of Justice to make. But I do think that these issues have to be investigated by the department. Some of them, obviously those who broke into the Capitol are under investigation and prosecution. But the plot went beyond those that were in the Capitol that day. And I do think those allegations merit investigation by the department.
Today, we heard a lot about this scheme to have states submit slates of fraudulent electors. And I suppose the hope was that Vice President Pence, or somehow the confusion, would allow Pence or the Congress to throw this back to the states, and thus allowing Trump to hold on to power. We finally heard of Donald Trump's involvement in this scheme, direct involvement, and we heard this from the Republican National Committee chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel. She testified about that call in which Donald Trump was involved. I want to play that for our viewers.
He turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result of any of the states. I think more just helping them reach out and assemble them. But my understanding is the campaign did take the lead, and we just were helping them in that role.
What is the significance, if any, of the fact that Trump initiated that call with the RNC chair?
Well, look, he was initiating that call to give the imprimatur of his support, his weight behind what was being asked of this head of the Republican National Committee. Likewise, this is why he's on the call with Rudy Giuliani to the Arizona Speaker of the House of Representatives, because this is Donald Trump's request that the Speaker of the House, a fellow Republican, in the absence of any proof, call the legislature back into session, decertify the Biden electors, and appoint some illegitimate electors for Donald Trump. And likewise, here he is meeting with his own attorney general, being told that these claims he is making are BS, but he's out there continuing to make these fraud claims that underlay the whole scheme. So look, this was his plot, and I think we demonstrated today his key involvement at different points along the way.
Is that illegal? Is it a crime to submit fraudulent slates of electors?
Well, this will be ultimately up for the Justice Department to decide. Our job is really to expose what went on, to prescribe legislative remedies, to protect the country going forward, but those kind of calls will have to be made by the Department of Justice.
I understand the decision to prosecute is up to the Department of Justice, but you used to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office in California. You're a former assistant U.S. attorney. You have an idea of what laws might be involved without saying whether or not somebody should be prosecuted. Is that potentially a crime? I'm not a lawyer. Help me out here.
Well, look, I think the broader plot to overturn the election, of which this was a part, likely violated multiple federal laws, as Judge Carter held. And I think it needs to be investigated not just by the Congress, but by the Justice Department. But again, I'm not prepared to reach a conclusion about what the Justice Department ought to do in terms of whether they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt of all the elements of a particular crime, but I do think it needs to be investigated not just by the Congress.
The vice chair of your committee, Liz Cheney, gave a rare public request, it seemed, for White House counsel Pat Cipolloni, former White House counsel Pat Cipolloni, to testify. What's your understanding about why he has not yet agreed to testify? And do you feel like ultimately we will hear from him, whether it's in taped recorded testimony or live?
Look, I hope he comes forward. Whether he ultimately will, I don't know. People are showing courage to do so. We had several courageous people come before the committee today, all of them in terms of the Secretary of State, the Speaker from Arizona, Gabe Sterling. You know, they're members of the president's party. Two of them talked about how they supported the president. One of them was out there campaigning for the president. And they've had the courage to stand up and do what's right and fulfill their duty as public servants. Whether Mr. Cipolloni will feel, that same, patriotic duty will be up to him, and it'll be up to the committee how to respond if he doesn't.
What reasons are Cipolloni or his attorneys or his representatives giving for not testifying?
That I really can't say.
It was gut-wrenching listening to the two women, the election officials, talk about the threats against them, emotional testimony from Shaye Moss. The Arizona speaker talked about the guns, the loudspeakers, the insane allegations against him, sexualized threats against kids. Do you think the Justice Department is doing enough to go after the individuals behind these threats against election workers and public officials?
I can't speak to, whether they're doing enough in every particular case. I can tell you, as an elected official, that so many of us are getting those kind of threats, and we're getting them all the time, and they seem to be increasing in intensity. And it's just a danger, not only to the individuals who work within our democracy, but a danger to the democracy itself. And I'm glad that Ms. Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman, and these other officials could put a human face on what it means when the President of the United States comes down on you like a ton of bricks. And as I mentioned at the hearing, if he could do that to Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss, and he can do that to loyal members of his party, he can do it to anyone. And that ought to get people to sit up and take notice, because anyone could be next.
Your committee chairman, Benny Thompson, said if people who support Trump's election lies, the big lie, if they win key state government jobs, then in 2024, quote, we won't have close calls, we'll have a catastrophe. We saw what happened in New Mexico with a county official refusing to certify because of some deranged theory having to do with election software. Do you think the nation has, the public at large, have any idea what's coming down the pike here?
Well, I don't know. Part of what we're trying to do is to sound the alarm that, the system held, but barely, and the lie that put our system in jeopardy is still being used around the country in ways like you just described in New Mexico and elsewhere. And people are running for office on a platform of ignoring the actual election results and just doing anything, saying anything, adopting any lie necessary to support whoever they want to win. That's how a democracy comes to an end. And we need to wake up to that threat, because we've had the good fortune to live in a democracy all our lives, and this democracy is centuries old. I think we've come to believe that somehow it is inevitable, and it's not. We're going to have to really stand up to protect it.
No, it's the American experiment. It's not the American proven theorem. Congressman Schiff, thank you so much. Good to see you as always. Coming up next.